a great opportunity within this story to portray the little prince in a way that I don't think audiences will expect.
It's difficult to illustrate on film the poetry of the book.
Kind of ironic to say, you know, anything essential is invisible to the eye, and yet we're trying to make a movie about that idea.
If you please, draw me a sheep.
Marcos Born s'est dit, on ne peut pas adapter le livre au sens propre, mais il faudrait que j'arrive à trouver une histoire qui permettrait de protéger ce livre-là. Et Marc a eu cette idée géniale. Et si l'aviateur, si le livre n'était pas connu?
What if the aviator never found anybody to share the story with?
Once upon a time, there was a little prince who lived on a planet that was scarcely bigger than himself, and who had need of a friend.
I thought you could use a friend.
So the biggest challenge is really finding a story that will utilize the book and create sort of a structure so that the book can be at the heart of a larger story. And that's where I'm really excited to have this little girl. She's going to be this great way for us to see the book through her eyes. So in some ways it gives us a lot of freedom with the material to tell this larger story.
Mark had an idea to illustrate the book in stop motion and wrap that section with the CG part of the film. This different medium representing the little girl's imagination, and it's incredible.
Trying to create a world that feels like a very realistic storybook. And CG is really a fantastic tool to do that because we can actually create a very sort of simplified and stylized world, but use cues that are very sophisticated to help us kind of ease into that storytelling and help us understand and believe the emotional connections between these characters.
The big thing is being able to see the clear kind of divisions between the different worlds. The warmth of the aviator and the little prince's world, and then the real world, strict, more formal, and the grown-up world being an extreme version of that.
That house made this house available and made your future possible.
The little girl is interesting in that she begins as a very sort of dour, serious character and finds the child in herself. So I knew my design had to be able to carry that range of emotion. She had to be able to transform from the beginning of the film, from basically grow from an adult to a child by the end of it. The interesting thing about the aviator is that, unlike the little girl, the aviator is a child in an old man's body.
He's a very conscientious character. He's caring. He's a very, very special character that wants to make connections. But in this world he's living in, he can't.
Friends!
All these characters are very iconic in the way they're presented. It's also a way for us to create this fairy tale, this storybook universe that should feel very unique and should feel like it's in keeping with the book. Kind of triggers in your brain when you look at stop motion. It makes you believe like it's a fantasy. It's like your toys are moving. That's why stop motion becomes the perfect medium to translate the passages of the book.
We wanted to work with paper because the stop motion part of this story is all about the book, and we find that connection, that making the whole thing come alive in a storybook way.
Exupery's illustrations are so simple and naive that it was really important to take those bits and interpret them in sculpturally in a way that still felt like illustrations.
It's interesting because we go from a sequence that is entirely made up of paper at the beginning, and then it becomes more dimensional, but we still keep a lot of the paper feeling. We're going through a lot of trouble to sculpt the heads out of a paper clay, which is very difficult to deal with, but it allows Alex and his team to lay down like a watercolor look on the faces.
The book illustrations were done in watercolor, so I wanted to sort of find those characters through watercolor as well.
It is only with the heart that one can see rightly.
I didn't want to make anything too clean. My approach to sculpting these guys has all been, so it's been like an imperfection and a roughness, natural, handmade feels.
So we're using watercolor, dyes, gouache, and all these colors that in those types of paint that we can get really vibrant colors to show emotion and climate, you know, a very hot desert in a scene.
We're not just surfacing every sand dune with a sand look. We're folding paper, and so how do you get that to still feel like you're in a hot desert?
Stop motion is all about movement. It's a specific kind of animation that creates a specific kind of illusion of movement, and when you're building armatures for a stop motion puppet, at a very basic level, it's our job to make the animator's job as easy as possible.
So the biggest part of stop motion is just making sure that you've kind of just gone through it just to feel everything out, to make sure nothing that's not supposed to move is not going to move, to make sure your puppets are properly rigged, to make sure you have everything you need before you start.
I too am going back home today.
Generally, you know, we can do a second a day, 2 seconds. It really depends on the shot and the complexity. And if the puppet and if your rigs are all, if everything is working together.
I've never worked with a puppet before that that was covered in paper. That posed the challenge because it's not as flexible as something like foam latex or silicone.
Stop motion really evokes those feelings of childhood, and so it's always been a great technique because it really taps into those sort of earlier sort of feelings of being a child.